Hello and welcome back to another Wargame Soldiers and Strategy painting tutorial. I'm literally just back from Crisis in Antwerp, which is a great big European wargaming show, so if my eyes look a little bloodshot, I've kind of got rings here, you'll probably know why. Now, if you remember last week, I was discussing how you could paint metal in large areas, and we demonstrated on this guy. He's from the Perry Plastics War of the Roses series, he's a knight figure. He's sort of one of the leaders, and I've assembled him as a bannerman with a great big long pole which will hold a flag. Now, he's kind of actually remiss in his duties right now because he doesn't have his flag. But the Perrys have very kindly provided in their set a lot of different standards and banners you can use, and I've cut one out. This is really for the whole army. So I showed you kind of last week too how that looks on the figure. You can kind of see it's really impressive, but it's not really actually all that great, I think, at this scale because it's really stiff paper that this is printed on, and it just doesn't work very well with these smaller figures. So I'm going to look at today how you can go about painting your own flags and, get way better results than this that are going to look way more realistic and way more believable, and you'll really be able to impress your friends, assuming you're in for a little bit of hand painting. Well, a bit more than a little bit, depending on how complex your flag is. And I'm not going to say that this isn't a lot of work, this method, because if you're hand painting a flag, it's always going to be a lot more work than if you just, cut one out or print one out or buy one on fabric or whatever. But this method that I've learned, I haven't seen anybody else doing it. There maybe is somebody else, but I haven't seen it very often. And for the amount of work that you put in, you will get more realistic, nicer results than, well, comparable methods that would produce sort of the same effect, basically. So this is for everybody who wants a really cool looking flag that really fits with the figure, because the other problem with this, of course, is really perfect looking. It's all printed out and just really perfect, and it doesn't really sort of match very well, I think, with the style when you kind of paint a figure. It looks too regular and too automated, in my opinion. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about how to make really great flags for your wargaming figures. So the first thing you need to do is obviously trace or draw your flag onto a piece of paper, and then copy the design out, which is what I'm doing right now. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to talk really quickly about the paper that I'm using here, because that is the secret really to this entire method. If you don't use the right kind of paper, it won't work. And what I have here is an Asian or Japanese Chinese brush painting paper. It's used for sumi and Asian calligraphy, and it is an unsized paper that I'm not sure what it's made of exactly. I think various trees and plants that kind of grow exclusively in China and Japan. It depends on which part of Asia it comes from, but both Japanese and Chinese make a type of paper that's very similar. Anyway, it usually comes in a roll. It might come in sheets. I think it should be available from better art supply stores or catalogs or online. But just make sure when you order it says that it's Japanese or Chinese brush painting paper or calligraphy paper, because that's really important. You must have this kind of paper or you will not be able to do what I'm doing here. It just won't work. That's the key to it all. And this is because it's unsized, which means it doesn't have chemicals in it, or it doesn't have things added to it which cause the paper to sort of repel liquids. So everything that you put onto it is just absorbed into it like a sponge. And this particular brush paint paper is also very, very thin. You can see it's almost transparent, so it's very flexible. So our whole technique is relying on using this paper that's, first of all, very absorbent, and then secondly, the texture of the paper is very different from most Western style papers. It's really almost more like fabric. It's very soft. It moves and bends and folds and creases much more like fabric than paper. Or as a matter of fact, you really will even probably have to use scissors to cut. If you try to cut this out with an X-Acto knife, you will tear and fray the edges of the paper. It really is very different from Western papers, and it is absolutely necessary for this to work. So I finished tracing and drawing out the design. Now I'm cutting it out. As you can see, you have to make two sides, the left and the right side of the flag, mirror images. And then you cut them out. I cut it out so that when it's when I paint it, the edges aren't white and that they have a color. If you don't cut it out first, you'll end up with white edges on the sides of your flag, and that is really unattractive looking. So here we are painting our wonderful Yorkist flag. This is Richard III's battle standard, I think. I don't know if it's the battle standard, but it is one of his standards. I am using Foundry colors here again, and I am applying them very undiluted out of the bottle because this paper is super duper absorbent, and if you apply them too thinly, the paper will just sort of soak them in and you'll get sort of a washed out funny effect, which you want. You want a really thick even layer that really covers things up as much as possible when you're doing this. And acrylics are really ideal for this because they're water-based, but they have sort of a polymer thing, in them or something, so it will form sort of this sort of almost plasticky layer on the outside of the paper, which actually serves to help protect the flag. It makes it sturdier, it makes it more stable. So you really want to use acrylics for this, and you want to apply them as thickly as possible. You can take your time, but don't worry too much about making mistakes, because you can really easily, once paint dries, go back over it and clean up edges and, tidy up places where you made mistakes before. And you want to work from sort of the back to the front, so you start out with background colors like the reds and blues, and work out to the whites and the yellows and the colors more towards the front. And the pencil lines that we put in earlier are really more just guides. You can cover them up whenever you want, but you just kind of want to use them to show you where things need to go. Once you know, you can kind of go back over them with once you know where things are going, you can just go over them with the paints, and then you don't really need to have them in anymore. And you may need to apply a couple layers to cover the pencil lines, depending on how thick and dark the colors are that you are using here. Sort of the last thing you'll be doing when you're painting, after you've applied most of the colors, is, well, at least in this case on this flag, is lining everything in black, because this particular design, pretty much everything is outlined in black. And even though what I said earlier about using thick colors out of the bottle is true, when you're doing something like this, you really don't have any choice but to thin down the paint some, because otherwise you just can't paint these really fine lines. But try to thin it down as little as you possibly have to. Luckily, black is such a intense color that it will usually cover pretty well anyway. So now you just really want to go back over the whole flag and add in those black areas. And there are certain areas that are really small, like you see on those roses, that makes it really hard to paint. Just outline it very easily normally. So what you can do here is you can make the black lines, and don't worry if they're too thick or they're awkward or blocky, because once you've painted them in, you can let them dry, and then you can go back over them with kind of white paint and thin those areas out and add in the detail you want. And that goes also for on those roses. There's sort of leaves around the edges that are green, but I've just painted in black stripes, as you can see, and then once that's dry, I'll fill in the middles with green, and that's a way easier way to paint those than to try to paint it green and then outline it with black. You can just get a finer looking line that way. And actually that's true with everywhere. The black lining is inevitably messy. You're going to make mistakes and get the lines too thick or messy in places, so don't worry too much. Just apply the paint, and once it's dry, go back over those areas where the black is in the wrong place or it's too thick, and use other colors to thin it back down again, and it's not very hard to do. Okay, so now we've finished painting both sides of the flag and cleaned up all the messy areas, and so you can see how it compares to the original one. It's more crude looking, more handmade, but I think that effect works better with figures. So now we're going to glue it on to our figure, and you can kind of see how that's going to look. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to apply a layer of thin down white glue very thoroughly to one side of the flag. You know, you really want to get a lot in, let the paper really soak it up, because in the paper will really soak this glue in. So, you know, apply it really well all over the flag. And then we're going to take some super glue, and we're going to apply that along our spear shaft in the area where the flag's going to be glued, because even though the white glue will hold the flag halves together, it will not attach it to the spear shaft. So you have to use the super glue for that. And now the next part here is really a little bit fiddly, as you're going to see getting it, because especially since this flag is sort of a very long, kind of an irregular shape at the ends, it gets really fiddly because you need to get the two halves stuck together, and so that all the edges line up and match up, and there aren't bumps or lumps in it, and that everything is in the right place. And you see I keep opening it and realigning it, and I made a little bit of a mess there with paper, but that's okay. And I even had to, here you see I have to even reapply some glue, because I got it was so misaligned before. And normally if you're doing a more conventional smaller flag, this step will be a lot easier, but even so, it's important to be careful here. Take your time, go slowly, be methodical, and just work on getting on the flag until you have got it sort of finessed it, the two halves together, so they match up really nicely. And I see here I've pretty much got that worked out now, and you can then let the glue dry, set up just a little bit at this point, because then it'll be a little bit easier to manipulate in the moment. And that glue, the white glue, is really soaked into the fibers of the paper, and it's made it very pliable and almost moldable. It's hard to explain if you don't have the paper, but now you get to do the really fun part, which is to shape your flag sort of into the form that you want to have, and it can move and bend really just like fabric. And you can see how I'm almost sculpting it, and you can crinkle it and crease it and mold it really just like, you know, into any sort of form that you want it to have. And you can put the most extreme crinkles and creases and folds in it, and it won't make sharp folds like a normal piece of paper would, but it will just you can make it really just flow and really look like a convincing piece of fabric. And I'm making it look like sort of a flag with no wind, so it's just sort of draping down behind him and flowing around, and I'm addressing to get lots of nice little creases and crinkles in there, really make for a visually interesting effect here in our finished flag. So once you've finished forming your flag and everything, you can just kind of leave it as it is, or you can choose to highlight, which is what I'm doing. Once it has had a little chance to dry from the last step, it will be really stiff, and it will just stay in the position that you left it. It'll be nice and stiff and solid. And I've also glued mine to the base here so that it won't move around as much, and it'll just be easier to work with. And so, like I said, you don't have to do what I'm doing here. It's totally optional, but I like to highlight my flag because it makes it just pop a little bit more. And if you plan a little bit ahead when you're painting the flag and just use colors that are slightly darker than the actual colors of the flag, this will work out even better. So really, it's very much it's pretty much self-explanatory what I'm doing here. I'm taking lighter versions of the colors in the flag, and I am applying them to the areas of the flag where there would be a lot of light hitting. So mostly on the sharp creases, as you can see, sort of the edges and the areas that are catching a lot of light as a highlight. And I'm doing this a little sort of a quick and dirty way. I'm not doing all of the colors. I'm only doing the areas where the colors that really, where there's, colors, big masses of color, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So I'm not going to highlight the black, for example, all the black fine line. That's silly. But I'm going to mostly focus on highlighting the red and the blue, because there's big areas of that color, and they really show up a lot, and they're important to the design. And you'll notice if those colors are highlighted. And the white is already white, obviously, so I can't really highlight it any further than it already is. But if you wanted to, you could always choose to initially paint it a very light gray color and then highlight it in white. So yeah, that's all we're doing now. It's just going to go over it and add the highlights to those areas to really make this whole thing pop and the colors really stand out. So yeah, I'm just finishing the yellow here on the flag, and that basically that about does it for this model. I hope that you found this flag painting tutorial useful. Like I said, this is a big, complicated flag, but you can just as easily use it on more simple, straightforward, even solid color flags, and just get really awesome results, even on smaller flags. It really works great, and you'll really impress your friends. And a lot easier than like folding sheet lead or something than having to paint the design on once it's folded and all that. It's just a mess. This is a great technique, and it really makes for wonderful models. So please tune in next time and for our next painting tutorial video. And for now, please like this video, share, leave your comments, tell me what you think, and I will see you next time.